in June 29, 1994, after having had these discussions online, I made this announcement on a news group that said, all right, so let's do an open source or a free version of DOS. And at the time, I didn't know the difference between free software and open source wasn't really a term, but we were calling things open. I didn't know the difference between free and open and public domain. And I thought that maybe public domain was kind of what we're going for, right? Because it's for the public. Everybody should be able to use it. And so the first version of DOS that what became FreeDOS was actually called PD-DOS. And it was also because you had MS-DOS and you had DR-DOS and you had PC-DOS, and now we had PD-DOS for public domain DOS. Because I also thought that was, kind of a cool thing to do as well. And then it didn't take very long before I realized actually we're not trying to make something public domain. Public domain is a different deal. We actually want to make something that is always going to be open, always going to be free for people to use. And we were already using the GNU GPL for a lot of stuff. And so within like 2 weeks, we changed it to FreeDOS with a hyphen, by the way. And then we eventually dropped the hyphen like a year or two later. And yeah, so I put out iBiblio, or at the time it was Sunsite, it was North Carolina, had an FTP site. FTP was the old file transfer protocol. And if you wanted to download Linux programs, they had a Sunsite at the time, it was now iBiblio, had an archive of Linux stuff. And so I reached out to them and I said, hey, I'm trying to do the same basic thing as Linux, but it's going to be DOS. Is there any way that I could get space on your server for DOS stuff? And they said, actually, we have a DOS directory, so we'll create a path for you on that. And so that's how we got our first, space on iBiblio. We're still using it. And so I shared some programs that I'd written, which were very, very basic, but they did the job. They proved that you could do something. And other people, saw that and they're like, hey, I want to get on that too. And so we had people that joined pretty quickly thereafter. We had somebody from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI, and one of the students over there thought this was kind of a cool idea. And so I think that was Tim Norman. He came in and he wrote our very first version of basically the FreeDOS command com called FreeCom. I shared the programs that I'd written that kind of made the DOS command line better, kind of improved on the DOS command line. I'm not the only person who did that. So lots of other people said, oh, here's my stuff. My stuff does the same thing. And very quickly, we started to collect these tools that replaced or improved on the DOS commands. And that's actually how it started, proving that it can be done, right? You show a very basic proof of concept that, things are working and you can actually make this thing happen. And then people were like, oh yeah, that's cool. Let's here's some stuff that I did that'll kind of add to that. And, if I had said, oh, no, I want to do this all myself, then that would have killed it right away. I mean, it would have died. The key there was, hey, great, that's cool, let's add that. And so we put that up on the server and then we make an announcement, hey, we've added some extra stuff. We had lots of very fast moving releases back then. I think, gosh, it might have been like monthly almost for the first couple. We didn't have a kernel at the time. It was just tools, and we kind of thought that was probably as expected. We found some other public domain stuff that people had written on their own long before that kind of did what we needed to do, that was replacing DOS pieces. And so we were adding that into our distribution of what we had now calling FreeDOS. And it was starting to actually very quickly replace the tools that you could have on the user space for MS-DOS. You could actually run this FreeDOS thing on top of an MS-DOS kernel. And it worked really well. And then Pat Villani, who wrote our kernel, he actually had already written a kernel, a DOS-like kernel, for, believe it or not, a Motorola 68000 system. But it was a DOS-like kernel, and he had ported it back to Intel because he was doing embedded systems work. And so he needed that. He just figured it was easier to write basically DOS applications that would run on whatever embedded system he needed if he had a DOS-like kernel. And so he actually reached out to, there was a project called DOS EMU. which is still around. DOS-EMU is, despite the name, it's actually more like a virtual machine. And so there's a piece in Linux kernel that they're leveraging that allows you to run DOS applications, and that's how I ran DOS if I was going to be in Linux. If I didn't want to reboot back into actual DOS, I would run DOS-EMU and run MS-DOS kernel under that, and with my own tools on top of it, FreeDOS stuff. And Pat Villani reached out to the DOS-EMU folks and said, "Hey, DOS-EMU is great. Did you want a kernel?" And the DOS-EMU folks said, "Well, we're focusing on the virtual machine part, right? DOS in a window." And so there's actually Jim Hall's been creating this FreeDOS system. Why don't you go over there and contribute to them? And so he reached out to me, and I was like, "It's awesome, right? We have a kernel that actually does a lot of DOS stuff. It actually was very compatible with DOS. It ran DOS applications, and that was just really cool to have this almost fully formed thing like come in and like here it is." And it was just a really fast growth, and it was entirely because we were always welcoming new people. You want to do something cool, right? Share it. We also, that also meant that we were including a lot of stuff in our DOS distribution that was actually much further beyond DOS. I mean, we took the attitude of the time of MS-DOS was kind of limited. They didn't really want to make it, very big. But we're doing something really great. And, we're kind of took what we kind of thought was the Linux model at the time, which is let's make it bigger and better. And so that means if somebody's got a tool that they think is cool and someone else thinks is cool, then we'll put it in. And we'll put it in our distribution. And so we really we're trying to like really open the door like pretty wide. So that was kind of the opening. For me, it's always just, I always just kind of like looking back on the origin there because it was just really fast moving and just really kind of opening the doors to a lot of people. Finding ways to say yes, I guess is how I'd say it today.